Salutations, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. Here I am outside Harold Laski's house in London. So this is where he lived the last couple of decades of his life. Harold Laski was a celebrated socialist academic in the first half of the 20th century. So he was born in Manchester to Polish Jewish parents. His father was a businessman trading in cotton. The family was comfortably well off. He had just one sister who suffered from a disability of some kind, I think a physical disability, and it wasn't terribly close to her. He went to Manchester Grammar School, which was considered the best school in the city. Ululu, as in the Latin sound that an owl is supposed to make. That's its magazine, maybe because it's meant to be so wise. So it had a number of distinguished past pupils. This is for boys only to this day. So his father was a liberal in politics, and they were not very zealous about their faith. So he then went to Oxford University. He'd already married before he'd gone up, and he read history. He graduated the first-class degree. He got married immediately, and he certainly had a daughter. I'm not sure if he had more children. He had a number of distinguished relatives in the arts. He volunteered for the British Army in the First World War, but was turned down on the grounds of ill health. He had quite poor eyesight, but I think it was something else. It was why they judged him to be permanently medically unfit. So then he lectured at McGill University in Canada, which had been founded not so long before. He also lectured at Harvard and Yale, but on a guest basis. He wasn't a tenured faculty or on a tenure track or anything like that. So politics was really his subject, although his degree was history. He only had one degree, and it was very common in the early 20th century, certainly in this country, for academics to do a primary degree and that's it. And his BA at Oxford would be upgraded to MA Oxon a few years after graduation, just by paying the fee, going through the ceremony even in absentia, and just get on writing your scholarly books and your articles in learned journals. No need for a substantive master's degree, no need for a doctorate. Substantive doctorates were only invented in this country in 1917. The DPhil at Oxford University, PhDs followed soon afterwards. The United States had only started them in the 1850s, and they were an innovation which had been imported from Germany. Anyway, so he was a distinguished scholar, writing about political theory, about sources of sovereignty, about the musings of Thomas Hobbes and so on, looking back even to ancient Greek philosophy. He was more into modern history and politics, where there was an overlap between the two, how the British cabinet functioned and things like that. So he came back here and he was lecturing at the London School of Economics and Political Science, LSE as it's known for short, founded by the Webbs not so long before. So the LSE is part of London University, which is an enormous university. London University got about 20 colleges, but each of these colleges is so big, they're effectively separate universities, as in Imperial College London, University College London, King's College London, and there are a few others. But LSE, as its name suggests, is only about politics, economics, and allied subjects. For example, you can't do medicine or dentistry or anything like that. You can't do hard sciences there. Only social sciences. So it attracted a following in undergraduates from Asia and Africa, particularly the British colonies. He got to know Jawaharlal Nehru, and he had a lasting influence on the first Prime Minister of India. So Laski was, by all accounts, a very vivacious and engaging lecturer, could make seemingly dry subject matter come to life for people, and was never afraid to engage in current political debates, but his lectures sometimes descended into diatribe. The opacity of his prose was excoriated by George Orwell and others, who, in his essay on the English language, who said that Laski's work was just impenetrable, regularly writing sentences of over 50 words with so many subordinate clauses, people completely lost the meaning. Was that the idea? He used words in a bid to obscure meaning and not to clarify. So he certainly wasn't everybody's cup of tea. He joined the Labour Party and the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society, obviously named after that ancient Roman general Fabius Quintus, known as Cunctator, or the Delayer. As in fighting Hannibal, his strategy was to play for time, to not engage with the enemy. Well, the Fabian tactics means doing things gradually. There was a moderate movement within the Labour Party, saying we may not achieve all our goals immediately, do it stage by stage, and that they didn't reject capitalism outright. He later moved to the left and became a Marxist, and there were Marxists in the Labour Party. They were a minority. James Ramsay MacDonald, the first Labour Prime Minister, held Laski in high regard, offered him to stand for a Save Labour seat. He turned him down flat, and he didn't want to be in the House of Peers either. But he was a prominent voice in the Labour Party into the 30s, and was open in expressing his admiration for the Soviet Union when most people in the Labour Party saw how things had gone very badly wrong in the Soviet Union, which was becoming viciously oppressive and deliberately starving millions of its people to death. That poverty in the Soviet Union was far worse than in the United Kingdom. In the UK, in the Great Depression, there were plenty of people who were hungry, but to my knowledge, not a single person died of starvation, whereas in the Soviet Union, millions of people died of starvation, and the Soviet government wanted it to be so, did it on purpose, on a huge scale over several years. But nevertheless, his faith was in the Soviet model. So he believed in state ownership of just about everything, in planned control. That didn't stop him owning private property. That didn't mean that he was going to give away his money to the needy, because socialism, that was for other people. He was to have the finest things for himself. Anyway, so the Second World War came along. He had been aghast that the Soviet Union had made a pact with the Third Reich, had been an ally of Nazi Germany against Poland, and indeed after the defeat of Poland, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany signed the Treaty of Friendship, and the Gestapo and the Soviet secret police actively cooperated in transferring Polish prisoners this way and that, and the communists who were in German concentration camps were not released. The Soviet Union didn't even ask for their release. Anyway, so then there came the attack on Pearl Harbor. Obviously, by this time the Soviet Union was already an enemy of the Third Reich, which had attacked it. So he was delighted to see American cooperation during the war, and he went to the United States, spoke there, wrote many articles saying that the maximum possible help must be afforded to the Soviet Union, because that was the crucial front. Well, he was correct on that one. The war ended. Now, he didn't react very strongly to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was very uncontroversial at the time. This was a war in which 60 million people had been killed, half of them civilians. Another 100,000 seemed to make little difference. Conventional bombing had killed billions of people. Why was a nuclear bomb qualitatively different? There didn't appear to be any moral distinction to draw between that and conventional bombing. Anyway, what upset him was the start of the Cold War. He was delighted to see Labour win a landslide victory in 1945, but he'd almost blown their chances by a speech he gave in favour of a Labour candidate in Nottinghamshire, saying, if we don't win the election, we'll have to use force. Yes, that means violent revolution. And that obviously was ammunition he was handing to the Conservatives who'd used this against him. But Labour still won handily. By this time, relations between him and Clement Attlee were fraught. Attlee was the leader of the Labour Party from 1935, and indeed Prime Minister after 1945, who found Laski to be insufferable, very conceited, thinking himself to be oh so clever, and was so judgmental about others. So some people found him hard work. So he was increasingly isolated. He was bitterly disillusioned by the start of the Cold War. He still said that the Soviet Union had a lot to be said for it, and he was disturbed by this rightward turn of politics in the United States. He'd vainly hoped that the United States might turn left after the war. There'd been wartime socialism. The government had had to take control of so much. The New Deal had extended government control into different areas of the economy. So he'd been hopeful that the United States might care more about social justice and might do more to abolish poverty and racial discrimination. And he'd always set his face against racial discrimination, considering it to be an utter abomination. He was also a tireless advocate of independence for India before it was fashionable in this country. So Harold Laski died in 1950. He's remembered to this day. He was a formative influence on Ralph Miliband, the father of the one-time Labour Party leader Ed Miliband. Don't let that put you off. So that is Harold Laski, who was renowned amongst socialists the world over, and he lived just 2 doors down from where Samuel Taylor Coleridge had lived. Right, toodaloo.